Professor Moy, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Welcome to Canada Bangladesh Social Justice Action Research Alliance. We organize critical and courageous conversations about local and global issues connected to equity, fairness, and social justice. Today, we will talk about something very important that is very contemporary. We will discuss how disinformation, misinformation, computational propaganda, how they are creating an existential threat to our science and society. And we have an excellent panelist for our conversation today. Um, I can hear a feedback. Probably, Professor Moy, would you mind muting the? Yeah, thank you. So sorry. Uh, our first panelist, Dr. Wesley Moy, retired from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security December 2019. He held a variety of senior positions, including Chief of Partner Engagement, Director of the Analysis Program Office, and Deputy Director of the DHS National Operations Center. Prior to that he was Associate Deputy Director for the Operations Support and plank owner of the National Counterterrorism Center. Since retiring, Dr. Moy has been conducting research related to pandemic-related misinformation and has been supporting the World Health Organization. Dr. Moy graduated from the State University of New York with a bachelor's degree in political science with a specialization in international relations. He has also earned a master's in business administration from Rutgers Business School, a master's of science of strategic intelligence from National Intelligence University, and a master's of strategic studies from the U.S. Army War College. He holds a PhD from North Central University, and he's a senior fellow at the Partnership for Public Service in Washington, D.C. He taught part-time at the National Intelligence University from 2000 until 2019 on topics including terrorism and intelligence analysis. Dr. Moy retired from U.S. Army as a colonel after serving in the infantry and military intelligence. In his last assignment, he was director for the National Intelligence University's Reserve and Monthly Executive Program. He has commanded at the company, battalion, and brigade levels, including serving as commander of all Army Reserve strategic intelligence in units worldwide. As a civilian, he spent 2 decades in financial services, including as vice president at JP Morgan Chase, Manhattan Bank in strategic planning and investment banking, vice president for sales development at Citicorp Investment Services, and branch office manager at New York Stock Exchange member firm. Our second panelist, Upama Ahmed, founder and president of Evolution 360, head of English Department, Canadian University of Bangladesh, country director, ambassador of UN SDG Network, and of course, Diana Award recipient of 2021. So I'm really excited that we have our guests today, and there are so many things that we'll be able to discuss today. First of all, Professor Moy and Upama, welcome to our conversation.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Professor Moy, you have gone mute. I'm sorry. I think at the bottom you're able to see a mute. Are you able to see a mute option at the bottom left where you had camera mic? Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much for the conversation and the invitation. Um, I'm getting a lot of feedback from
Yeah,
the
Upma, can
audio.
you go when only turn on the mic only when you speak? So sorry. Um, I have, of course, quite a few questions, and let's start with Upama. That Upama, could you talk about that in your engagement with Evolution 360, and could you give us a scenario that how misinformation or disinformation or computational propaganda, how it is impacting Bangladesh, so that it gives a uh, understanding to Professor Moy.
Sure. Thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm really looking forward to learn a lot of things from Professor Moy. And I am not an expert in this field, but definitely I'll give my insights from my experience as person living in Bangladesh. So I'll be talking in Bangladeshi context, obviously. And I will definitely put forward my concerns as an activist and just will try to give an overview of what the situation is here in our country. So basically, to start with my organization or my activities, I am currently leading a youth led community organization, which is Evolution 360. And we basically work on social issues, the contemporary social issues. Our focus is gender, but apart from that, we also work on climate, misinformation, disinformation, and other areas like this. So, very recently, we had a partnership with an INGO, Plan International Bangladesh. I'm sure all of you are well aware. So, Plan International has been working on eradicating misinformation and disinformation and the adverse effects of these topic on the young girls and women since past 1 year. And we have recently joined them in their campaign. And according to their statistics, they have a campaign going on, the Truth Gap, where they have a report analyzing around 26,000 young girls and women from 26 different countries. And they found some amazing, facts that how misinformation and disinformation has been affecting the lives of young women and young girls. So, as you know, misinformation, disinformation affects the male and female in completely different ways. So, I'll try to give an overview about that as well. So, that's where the Truth Gap campaign of Plan International started. And since Evolution 360 is an recipient of Equality Award by Plan International, we started a campaign named Campaign Shuddhota, hashtag Be Genuine. So Shuddhota word is a Bangla word which means purity. So we are looking for the purity or authenticity of an information, and we are trying to aware or create awareness among the young generation about misinformation, disinformation, what to do, what not to do, and things like that. So we have a campaign going on regarding this, and I have a team of 500 people who are researching on the topic and trying to create awareness regarding this. And now to talk about the impacts of misinformation and disinformation, it can be categorized into two different, categories. Like one can be related to health, which is COVID-19 or pandemic, keeping in mind the very recent context, and the other can be related to entertainment, religion, and political agendas. But interestingly, in today's discussion, I'd like to focus on the health related misinformation and disinformation that we have been facing in our country and also in general in South Asia. So when the pandemic broke out, what happens is in our country, we have some conspiracy theories. When it started in China and it didn't actually came in Bangladesh, so people started giving some conspiracy theories. A group of people started saying that coronavirus will never come in Bangladesh because there is a weather factor involved. The climate is not sustainable for the coronavirus. And there were some other people, some religious people saying, who had different motive. They said that uh, only because Bangladesh is a pious Muslim country, coronavirus is not going to affect Bangladeshis because it's a curse from God or something like that. These kinds of things kind of confused everyone. And we know in any emergency, in any pandemic or epidemic, the misinformation, disinformation is definitely on the rise, creating mass paranoia, chaos, conflict, confusion among the people. So when pandemic actually hit Bangladesh and there was shutdown and lockdown, there was a group of people who said coronavirus is nothing but a myth. People are trying to control the citizens by saying there is coronavirus, but actually there is no coronavirus. That is the same reason when the shutdown started in March 2020, many people went for vacations. Many people went to Cox's Bazar to visit Sea Beach, and they kind of took this lockdown as an opportunity of family vacation. And that was trolled in our social media and in the news channels as well. So people were not actually aware of what is happening. And there was a statement, a very, very famous statement: highly concentrated alcohol can disinfect your body, and this can cure coronavirus. So this statement alone claimed at least more than 800 lives worldwide. not only Bangladesh, but people of South Asia wholeheartedly believed in the sentiment, and they started following it, which created a great havoc. And Personally, I have seen my mother coming every day with cinnamon and hot water and salt vinegar, coming to me and saying, eat it and you coronavirus will not affect you. You have to drink it every day. Or my father saying, you have to smoke every day because coronavirus won't affect the chain smokers. So these were the kind of misinformation and disinformation we have been saying as very normal citizens. Okay, so this was kind of a daily life thing. Every day some news popped out of YouTube.
Mhm.
Every day some news popped out of on Facebook that this, do this and there will be no coronavirus, do that, there will be no coronavirus. There was a religious bunch of people saying, eat thankuni leaf 3 times a day, saying Bismillah, and coronavirus won't affect you. So they were definitely trying to attack the sentiment of some people somewhere,
Mhm.
trying to gain something out of the whole situation, out of the whole
Mhm.
confusion. And unfortunately, for some people in our country, Facebook is the internet. And it's not only in Bangladesh, it's actually the scenario of whole South Asia. Some people don't even know what Google is, or what the difference is between Google or Quora or some other software. All they know is Facebook. So whatever they see in Facebook, they believe it without trying to verify the information. The reason is, the most challenging problem in South Asia is people have a huge lack of digital literacy. They don't have digital literacy, and thus they don't know how to verify the facts. And because of this, many people they try to politically economize the situation, and they try to gain some personal advantage. There was a political leader who said, I have dreamed that coronavirus will go away from Bangladesh if Khaleda Zia is released, an opponent leader of our country. So this was again trolled, taken as a funny statement. And there were people saying Putin employed 800 lions and tigers to make lockdown effective, so Bangladesh should do this as well. So all these kinds of misinformation kind of confused the people. And not to
Mhm.
mention religion. Since Bangladesh is a very religious country and we have a majority of Muslims living here, when everything was in lockdown and everything was shut down, there were people who said that the mosques are being shut down because of coronavirus. This is probably done by the atheists. This is because they have a specific motive. Or Saudi Arab cancelled Hajj due to pandemic. So this also created protest and confusion among the people. So they were
Yeah.
very anxious about this
Yeah.
situation. So
Yeah.
this is basically what happened in Bangladesh. Misinformation and disinformation has definitely caused us a dreadful situation that we have been facing. And as normal people, I would definitely love to hear from Professor Wesley, that how to combat this, or how do we verify what is misinformation and disinformation. Because straight up our parents are coming to us saying this, our friends are saying something, we are hearing something from the state, even regarding the statistics of how many deaths due to COVID, or how many affected people. So there is also a data colonization happening there. So we don't
Mhm.
know. All
Yeah.
over South Asia, this problem
Yeah.
has been evident. So yes,
Yeah.
this is what happened, and I'm really looking forward to some productive answers from our expert in today's session. Thank you. We will discuss further, hopefully.
Yeah, thank you, thank you, thank you, Upama. I we have, I mean, Upama and I both have read Professor Moy's paper, where you outline for our audience. We are hoping this conversation, and we know that we use this conversation for creating consciousness among students in Bangladesh. Professor Moy, my first question to you for us, could you tell us that basically how do you look at information disorder, like how you differentiate between, for example, misinformation, disinformation, then malinformation, then propaganda? I mean, how are we to make sense of it? And, we know that disinformation campaign has a rich military history, particularly starting from Cold War. Could you give us some idea about that, please?
I guess first we should start with the definitions. Actually, we should first start with I did solve the feedback problem here, which is a good thing. And then let me say again, if that didn't come through previously, thank you for this kind invitation. I really appreciate the look at the situation that you're facing in Bangladesh, and I think it's very, very important that we communicate around the world on the problems that we're seeing, because no one has a corner on good ideas and the right way to counter what we're experiencing. Um, Firstly, let me say that the definitions are very important, and it's a way to understand the information that's coming at you. Um, Misinformation is, it can be true or false information, and it's shared not with the intent to do harm. So this could be a relative, your mother or father, sharing something that they think is important to you with no malice involved. They think that you should know this because it's important. That's very much in contrast with malinformation. Malinformation is information shared to cause harm. And there are plenty of examples of this, and we can talk about them a little bit later. But again, misinformation versus disinformation is no malice involved, and then with malinformation, intent to cause harm. Now, propaganda has a long history, um, uh, and this is nothing new. What is new is actually the Russian definition of hybrid warfare and how the entire spectrum of conflict is used by them. So, firstly, um, one thing to remember is that political polarization, this is from Brookings Institution, political polarization drives a lot of misinformation and even malinformation. That's very much true in the United States. I suspect is very much true around the world. So we share a common set of problems. Uh, Karl von Clausewitz, who was an 18th century writer, a Prussian military officer, a writer on military affairs, said that warfare is a continuation of politics by other means. So misinformation coming from politics, warfare just generates that. And then over a century ago, a U.S. senator said that the first casualty of war is the truth. And that's what we're facing. Now, something else to think about, and this is for all of us now dealing with not history but more modern problems. Um, Conspiracy theories are easier to understand than science. Remembering what science is. Science has been called a slow stumble towards less uncertainty. So if you think about the scientific methods where you test a hypothesis and it's right or wrong and you continue to do that, that's incremental improvement, whereas conspiracy theorists can point to something and say, this is how it is, don't worry about all that science stuff, it's a lot of gibberish, here's the truth that I'm telling you. So it's kind of the environment that we're dealing in. And then we can talk a little bit about the sources of where misinformation and disinformation is coming from, and there are different motivations. For example, the U.S. intelligence community assessed over the last several years that the Russian meddling in the elections in 2016 and 2020, the Russians really didn't care whether or not Donald Trump won. They were trying to discredit a Hillary Clinton administration. And the reason is, and the motivation behind all that was to undermine democratic legitimacy. And you can see their activities, especially in Eastern Europe, where they attack the societies that used to be in their sphere of influence, potentially destabilizing them. So they're looking to undermine the leanings of democracy and push countries back into their sphere of influence. China's a little bit different. China, by 2035, wants to be the premier superpower in the world. And by all measures, they want to be the diplomatic leader, the economic leader, the military leader, the intelligence leader. And that's really in their plans now. They're not necessarily pushing misinformation because they want to undermine other countries. The misinformation is more directed towards building up esteem towards China. And they're willing to take great measures to that, including measures that are not normally acceptable in international interaction. and international trade. For example, as everyone here knows, the Chinese vaccines, Sinovac, Sinopharm, are certainly not as effective as the ones developed in the West. Um, and China does want to catch up on mRNA technology. Early last year, middle of last year, there were attempts to steal Moderna um, mRNA technology. So they're willing to steal in order to catch up. And then finally, and this is what's impacting a lot of people here, is the American political process generates a lot of information, not because they want to harm the world, but the Republicans want to harm the Democrats and vice versa. And you take a look at the discourse. Um, for example, here in the United States during the last presidential administration, about 20% of misinformation related to COVID um, is attributable to Donald Trump. And of course, the media echoed that, and that accounted for a huge amount of the bad information. Let's call it misinformation, because I don't think Trump necessarily wanted to cause harm. He was sharing this because he had another agenda. Also, here in the United States, there are about 12 people that generate COVID and vaccine related misinformation. And they're called by one of the research institutes the Misinformation Dozen, and they account for 65% of the bad information related to the vaccinations. And people believe these things. They believe that uh, the vaccines have nanoparticles that will help Bill Gates track everyone around the world. They believe that the vaccines will make you magnetic. Um, we have plenty of cases where people do not get vaccinated, they catch COVID 19 and wind up in the hospital. When they get to the hospital, oftentimes they ask for the vaccination, but of course, then it's too late. And to their dying day, others say they don't believe in COVID 19. So they're believing more in the um, conspiracy theories that are not based in fact, and even death does not dissuade them from that. So let me stop here and allow you
Yeah.
to direct the conversation to where you want it to go.
um, One of the things that I want us to think about is that the Oxford Internet Institute published a report in 2020 that showed that 81 countries, the governments of 81 countries, they are waging an information war. And according to that report, let's say a country like Bangladesh, we see that the information that how we are getting information from outside, and we have seen that how easy it is to destabilize countries with disinformation. Adding to Upama what Upama just mentioned, now I want to add some very sad and difficult situation in Bangladesh, which is because of disinformation. We have seen that the rise in communal violence, particularly after 2011, the spread of communal violence or faith-based violence, they spread on social media. I'll give you a very probably one of the naive examples that one young boy has written something about our prophet, and bunch of people felt that we need to take vengeance on that. They have gone on and burned many houses in the village. Now let's take example of Myanmar. In Myanmar, when Myanmar military was deliberately spreading disinformation about the Muslims of Myanmar, and it took it didn't take long to dehumanize the Rohingya Muslim population. And subsequently, when Facebook was held accountable in terms of saying, well, what Upama just mentioned, that in many countries, Facebook is the form of internet, is the form of information, because what you just have said about misinformation, that I may not know a lot of people, but if I know Upama to be my sister, to be my family member, to be my friend, if things come from Upama, whether it doesn't matter that whether my friend has expertise on that or not, I will trust that information. So we are seeing that increasingly in India, that information is being weaponized, weaponization of information, and particularly researchers call it affective weaponization of information. Um, a very prominent politician in India said that we can make anything viral, whether it is true or false, that is not important. And we have seen public lynching in India when message spread virally. And one very notable example that Rana Ayub, a very prominent, and probably Upama will relate to that as well, that how disinformation impact women differently than men, that Rana Ayub, when she was protesting against, right-wing persecution of Muslims in India, they created a pornographic video of a very prominent Muslim journalist using deep fake. So we are facing something where we can no longer trust what we see. We can no longer trust what we hear. If we all imagine when the famous video came out about Donald Trump's, Hollywood tape video that, he can do whatever he wants to do. I wonder if it was today, 2021, he could easily say that, well, that's not that's not true. It's a fake video, right? So the thing is, a country like Bangladesh, we don't have resources to go to digital forensics. We cannot deploy, AI experts to test whether that video is true or not. So we are facing threats from multiple sides. But a lot of the time, our focus goes into, well, how the disinformation is spreading, who is getting impacted. And this is where me as a disinformation researcher, social media researcher, is my concern. And I was wondering that if you could, share your insight about it. My concern is actually twofold. One, the political economy of disinformation. The global digital economy runs on the same old racial, colonial, capitalist logic. Point in case, when Facebook was held accountable and Frances Hagen came before the US Congress, she said, and obviously we know that from other articles too, that Facebook spends 84% of its budget to fight disinformation in the United States. That has less than 10% Facebook users. Bangladesh is the second most active city in the world in terms of Facebook. But Facebook spends only 14% for the rest of the world. So does that mean that lives in Bangladesh don't matter? Lives in India don't matter? Lives in Myanmar don't matter? And we can't do anything to Facebook because what Bangladesh can do, we have companies like Google or Amazon or Apple. They have grown bigger in GDP than countries. So, Professor Moy, could you look into this scenario that, like climate change, we didn't create it, but we are suffering the consequences? This disinformation scenario, this ecosystem where literally we are going through reality vertigo. We don't know what to believe anymore. So, could you share your, point of view, your insight, particularly also coming from an intelligence, experience? What are we to do about it?
Well, personally, I think that the weaponization of information is not new. It's been going on for a long time. And I don't know that anyone, I don't think that I have the answers to that. Here in the United States, we have right wing extremists who, in many cases, are violent. And as all of you saw, um, they stormed the U.S. Capitol, and they have stormed state capitals recently. We have, to some extent, Antifa, and I don't think that most of the Antifa members understand that the original Antifa from the 1920s and 1930s, they were the militant arm of the Communist Party. And I think if they knew that, they probably would not be embracing at least the Antifa moniker. Um, just recently, and this is in the last day or so, so you may not have seen this, um, and this speaks to the Oxford Internet Institute concern about whether or not populations should trust states. So just yesterday, um, uh, the two men that were convicted in the killing of Malcolm X in the 1960s were exonerated. They didn't do it, but they were railroaded by the prosecutors, by the FBI and the New York City Police Department. So they were, um, they were exonerated. One of them is still alive. The other one had passed away. And in looking at the evidence, even the person that probably pulled the trigger on the shotgun that killed Malcolm X had said those other two people had nothing to do with it. I did it. But it didn't matter. They went ahead and convicted those two men, and they spent at least 2 decades in prison. Um, One of the things that does give me hope is if you take a look at the Council of Europe, um, I'm going to read exactly so I don't get this incorrectly. Reference framework of competencies for democratic culture. Um, I find that initiative is exciting because the idea is to teach people, starting at school age, to think critically and to look critically at information. I think also that there were a number of efforts that this is based on. For example, in Finland, they took the initiative to start educating children in elementary school um, to think critically about the information that's coming at them. Now, for a country like Finland and for countries that um, I'm going to say border Russia, that's very important because of the Russian information campaign that's being waged all throughout their former sphere of influence, those Warsaw Pact countries. Um, and in looking at the framework, um, I'm very concerned that, at least here in the United States, we won't be able to implement something like that because the political parties would find that objectionable, because that would have the population looking very hard at what the political parties are saying. Coming back to weaponization, this is also a concern. There's a story of two generals, uh, probably 10 years ago, a Vietnamese general and a U.S. general who had both participated in the war in Vietnam. And the American general said that, that we won every major battlefield engagement throughout the war. And the Vietnamese general said, well, that may be true, but it's also irrelevant. And if you think about this, why did the United States lose the war? I think it was because the population eventually said, we do not support this war. Now, whether or not the war was justified, and I say that as a someone that was in the military for 30 years, um, if we can sway the population and negate military strength, it also becomes a concern. Um, so that there are a number of things that we're going to need to grapple with. But again, I do think that um, we need to look hard at the Council of Europe initiative. I think there's learning there. I am afraid that um, we may have to start with elementary school children, and this may be a generational process. I do think also that this information age that we're in has taken many people beyond the point where they can comprehend the information that's coming at them so quickly. Now, I think everyone here um, that's listening to this conversation, that's taking part in this conversation, everyone here is very, very interested in all of the things that are going on in the world and all of the things that affect them, and misinformation. Um, but this is not most of the population of the earth, which is very, very concerning. Your efforts to reach as many people as possible um, doesn't reach that many people, and we need to figure out how we get to more people and how we get them to be smarter is not the right word, how we get them to be better critical thinkers so they can they can realize that the claim that having a vaccination will make you magnetic is ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah. And now, Professor Moy, I think so. There was a study at Harvard Misinformation Center. What they're trying to grapple with is we are, for the first time in the history of humanity, are living in an informational civilization. In the past, we had different kinds of civilization, but this is informational civilization. That's one. Second, what I have found in my research in terms of political economy of disinformation, the fourth industrial revolution or the digital capitalism depends on the data of people. So, my concern is that if we look at the historical capitalism, historical colonialism as a process, historical colonialism could not have happened if they did not also come with a kind of ideology, the civilizing mission that, okay, from Europe, from global north, you go to the rest of the world for civilizing them. Now, from there, we understand that capitalism, colonialism, and ideology work as a holy trinity. Now, in comparison to that, right now, what we have a different holy trinity. Under digital capitalism, the data of people is needed for generating all the money that the technology tech titans are making. So what they are doing, they're colonizing, and this is what I say scarily, three things. I'm sure that you have seen that, oh, in every 1 minute, this billion hours of YouTube video is watched. So 1 minute is no longer 1 minute. 1 minute is billion minutes. So now the digital capitalism is out there to colonize time, to colonize space, which is not essentially physical, the virtual space. Because if you look at Arab Spring, if you look at Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, Idle No More, all these social in Bangladesh, Upama would relate to that. Shahbag movement is unprecedented. That uh, the society came together so quick, just like Arab Spring, that we came for the trial of a war criminal, and we made that happen. So what you just said, that in Vietnam War, when people went against, the war could not have continued anymore. But now the tech titans, they're colonizing time, they're colonizing a space, and this is the most scary part for me, is that they're colonizing consciousness. Scholars like Theodor Adorno, Horkheimer, um, they have warned us way before Facebook or computational propaganda came to exist, is that Hitler was using propaganda to demonize, to dehumanize the Jews, which was actually socially engineered. It's not essentially, and we have seen the event. So critical theorists have warned us in terms of saying, well, if people do not think, they will fall into that trap very quickly, very fast. Now, in the United States, more people believe that the government is run by Satan worshiper, some kind of cabal who, slaughter children, the Pizzagate event. The most economically advanced country in the world, the most militarily powerful country in the world, is almost brought to its knees when it comes to like how one Twitter by Trump has stormed the most powerful place on earth, US Capitol. It is not a joke. It is not a joke. So, in a place like that, when we have tech titans that is colonizing time, colonizing space, colonizing human consciousness, don't you think it's kind of very unfair asking us when we don't even know? I mean, people like Sushana Zuboff, people like Tristan Harris, people like Tim Wu from Columbia University has written the book Attention Merchant. Our attention is no longer ours. Our attention can be engineered. We are being engineered. Now, imagine in this situation, I'm a father too. I'm just wondering, can I ask my child to be like, okay, uh, it's a battle between the tech titans with endless amount of resources with a 10-year-old, 14-year-old. So I know that we don't have a solution, but it's a provocation. But I mean, you have worked in the military. You are a professor, and as I was saying, that you have trained people in terms of intelligence. Could you tell us, like, how what are some of the trainings or techniques or things that you would teach to somebody at a university? Like, oh, think critically in this way, just like an analyst would think, like want to understand something. Could you give us some trick, some hack? Like, what could we do?
The problem, of course, is that there are no tricks and it's all hard work. I think your point about a recolonization because of the information that's available now is interesting, but I think that it started a long time ago. The fact that we are having this conversation in English um, is indicative of that cultural colonization, that business colonization that started many decades ago. On the other hand, um, I think that this can be used because this has also facilitated um, us exchanging ideas today. So it is a two-edged sword in the sense that must you guard against being acculturated by the West? Yes. But at the same time, the fact that you reached out and we're having this conversation now, I think is the other edge of that sword that you can continue to use and engage globally. Now, do the tech titans kind of control the world and and information and how we think? Um, Perhaps, but I think that to counter that, we have uh, people in universities, in civil society, in formats like this that are questioning um, what is going on, and um, perhaps we can be the foil that helps to shape the understanding going forward. And Poma, that's why I think your effort is so important. And I know sometimes it probably feels like the tide is coming in and you're trying to push the tide back with a broom. But um, what you do is so important. And for us, with you reaching out to spread information and help people think critically, these are the kinds of ways we can counter um, people telling us what to think. I know that I had heard a few years ago that in United States journalism schools, they got away from uh, the five W's and the how, the who, what, when, where, why, how, and instead they're encouraging journalists to inject their own opinions into the news stories, which I think is dangerous. Um, Now, of course, in uh, in academic research and writing, the authors and the researchers' opinions are injected into their writings. That's absolutely true. However, the difference is things like peer review, where there are one or more people looking critically at what you're doing and testing your logic, testing your data, testing your assumptions. And that does not happen in the media, certainly not here in the United States.
Absolutely. Upama, I mean, you were teaching at the university, and you were also leading an amazing project where you're working with 500 young people to. Could you tell us that what are some of the biggest concerns you have when I just have said that? I mean, I mean, this is what I think it's also very unfair, is that as a doctoral researcher, as a professor, and Professor Moy, or as you as a professor, we spend pretty much 90% of our time in um, flexing our neocortex. That's what we do. We think, we read, we analyze. Um, and that's why I think the essay by Noam Chomsky, the responsibilities of the intellectuals, is so, so important, that not everybody has the economic privilege to go home and think about things hard. Um, Adding with Professor Moy's point is that where academia and scholars and professors and people who research, they have a responsibility to go out there, engage with the community, to create critical consciousness. But you see, as I said it too in other meetings too, is that Canada Bangladesh Social Justice Action Research Alliance does not have any government funding. We have not received any corporate sponsorship ever. Like, no. Um, I'm doing this purely being an educator for nearly 25 years, and I know that to what extent critical thinking is necessary to getting out of. In that case, the country where I operate, I don't know, Professor Moy can also add that after you share your opinion, is that in Canada we have a agenda. I mean, the government gives money for your research, but then government asks you, well, what is the knowledge translation? How your research that is funded by taxpayers' money is benefiting taxpayers to communities. So we have a responsibility like that. Do you think in Bangladesh, professors, Derek, well, I'm going to say, I apologize. We are not really well paid. We are struggling to, you know, uh, it's not that easy. So, what is your thought on that? Is that what you are doing? I know that you do most of the work based on voluntary. You don't have any financial gains out of that. Could you share your experience on that front?
Sure. Thank you so much for the question. So, yes, you very rightly already mentioned that teachers have a very hard life in our country, and we are multitasking every day. It's not just a role as an educator, we also mentor, we also counsel, we also look into the problems of our students very closely. And besides being an educator, it is definitely hard being an activist. Since I've been doing my advocacy in the community since past 5 or 6 years right now, so it's kind of it came from my passion, and it's kind of a part of me right now. So whatever I do, wherever I go, if you sent me to heaven, I'll do the same. So that is kind of a natural thing for me. And being an English professor, I always encourage my students or try to teach them how to be critical thinkers, as Professor Wesley said, that we need to have a critical analytic skill to verify what is happening around us or what the situation is, where are we kind of headed. So the information capitalism, as we mentioned earlier, dominates the production and flow of information. But as a global citizen, what are our roles? How should we look into that? Should we actually let others colonize our consciousness, or should we actually do something about it? So based on that, I always encourage my students, as I mentioned, on critical thinking, following, that is why critical thinking, questioning is very important. And that is not what I'm saying, that has been said by Socrates 2800 years ago. He followed the Socratic method for the same reason: questioning, examining, or raising a question on whatever is happening around us. So many people say, I got Sinopharm when I got vaccinated. So many people say, oh, Upama, you won't be able to travel abroad because you have got vaccinated with Sinopharm. And I see my colleagues saying, oh, I have a date of vaccination tomorrow, but I'm not going because that center is giving Sinopharm, and I will go abroad. So I cannot take that. If I take Sinopharm, probably I won't be able to travel. So these are the things. And then I ask again, why do you think this is the case? Why do you think Sinopharm is not effective? So, questioning is actually the base of critical thinking or any kind of critical analysis. So, and adding to what Professor Wesley said, they're always the innocent people are kind of sacrificed. About the incident you mentioned, which happened in Bhola district, hundreds of Muslims took to the streets and killed a person who made a derogatory remark on our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And you know what happened after investigation? When the police came, there were 4 people were killed already in the conflict. And after investigation, they found that this the person who actually posted the status, his Facebook was hacked, and that was done deliberately to instigate the clash between two communities. And even if I talk about a very recent communal conflict, like while the Podda Bridge was being constructed, there was a rumor or fake news, disinformation was actually disseminated in the social media that the bridge required some human sacrifice, and that's why children are being kidnapped, so you have to be careful. And what happened is a local mob, a very agitated mob, they beat people to death in the streets, thinking them as kidnappers. So lives are being lost. We are facing great threat. It's equally threatening for the society, for the normal people. This misinformation and disinformation or malinformation, which I hope to discuss further in the session. So all these things are creating a very dreadful situation in our society, and it's very hard to live with all these. And that is where the problem started, and from that problem we decided to act on it, because whenever there is a social problem, we have two options. Number one, stay quiet, wait for others to react, wait for others to do something. And step two, do something yourself. So we all kind of have this idea, being normal people, we all have our lives, we all have our occupation. It's not possible for everyone to do multitask and do everything at a time. But people think that some superhero will come, some Superman will arrive and solve this problem, solve this issue. But let me tell you, there is no superhero coming. We are not living, unfortunately, in a Marvel movie. So no one is going to come. No Captain America, no Iron Man is going to save you from this. You kind of have to act yourself. And that is why I always tell my team of volunteers who are working voluntarily in the cause since past few years, I always tell, you are the superheroes. The volunteers are the superheroes. The advocates are the superheroes. The activists, the youth activists of our country are the superheroes, because they are doing what needs to be done from their part. And there are people, there are critics who will say, what is your profit in this? Who is giving you money? What are you gaining from this? But if you keep listening to them, if you keep listening to that, then what is the difference between you and them? What makes the distinction between you being an activist or being an awardee, an international awardee, and a normal person who doesn't give a damn what is happening around them? So I believe this consciousness is very important. No, we should not let others infiltrate our consciousness, and we should act accordingly as much as possible, even if it's just sharing a Facebook post. Like, we have a target of reaching around 5,000 people, and how do we do that? After training, say for example 100 people, we are telling them, each one of them, to train at least 5. So these 100 people are empowering 10 more people. So this is the way the information is being disseminated, and that is how the campaign is being spread and the reach is increasing. So that is one of our causes, and thank you very much. I'll stop here now. I think you're muted.
Thank you. You're absolutely right that we cannot give the charge of our consciousness to somebody else. Um, Now, Professor Moy has mentioned something very important about Malcolm X's murder. If we look at some examples, the famous, at least in American context, if I give American example, we all can relate to that. Um, when the Central Park 5 event happened, 5 black youth were arrested on wrong charges, and they were in prison. And their life, yes, we know, I mean, how many convictions? And I know for a fact that today one of the for example, in the United States, the Tuskegee case, the medical appetite, that how deliberately the doctors treated black bodies as something to experiment on. I mean, if you read the harrowing history, that will, I don't know, even when Hitler sent um, his representatives to the United States and seeing the kind of racism, Hitler was thought that's too extreme. So we look at the United States, and Dean Freelon's paper is right on point. The Russian disinformation campaign tapped on the old racial divide in the United States. We know that countries like United States, countries like Brazil, countries like, there are so many examples, we can give example, that government is not apolitical, and telling the truth to power has a cost. Bertrand Russell was imprisoned for standing against the war. Hitler had to, Socrates had to give his own life for speaking the truth. So, in India, look what happens. You may speak the truth to the power, but the truth is political. There is a political economy of truth. The founding myth of the United States invisibilizes the genocide of the indigenous people, that 98% people of Canada and America, where I am at the moment in Canada, Professor Moyes in the United States, is that if you read statements of President Jackson, it will like almost take you like, oh my God, the declaration, yeah, the what's the document called, Professor Moyes? I'm missing the name. The Declaration of Independence, that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, but not for all. You can't. That is not for everybody. So the black people. If you look at the 13th Amendment, that how black bodies have been, the slavery ended, but that one amendment that yes, you have the freedom, but if you're a criminal, no, you don't have that freedom. We know Black Lives Matter event in the United States, there is no shortage of evidence. Professor Moy, question to you is that we have seen globally a decline in trust in public institutions, governments, scientific sources, because when Black people know that they have been treated very badly in the past by the medical profession, isn't it very likely that they will not trust? So right now, we are trying to combat misinformation, but there is a reason behind people not trusting the medical professionals, not trusting the government around the world. You have also trained people to, what are some of the things you have found to be very effective when you are training your students or in your life generally, that has helped us to think critically? Like I have a professor a professor in the United States, he has given a social media post that I have a healthy distrust to authority, but still I have taken my vaccine. So he is expressing his distrust, but he is also vaccinated. What has worked in your experience to build people's critical thinking ability to fight against such information warfare? Particularly think about psyops. It's a military technique. You have worked in the military. Tell us about it, please.
I'm not sure if I have the answer to that.
Give us some provocations at least.
Well, I think that education is so important. That's not the whole thing. For example, my first assignment in the Army was in South Korea in 1980. At that time, the per capita gross domestic product was about $700 annually. And of course, you can look for many other countries today and envy the progress that South Korea has made. But if you look at South Korea, at the time, starting in 1980, perhaps before, they embarked on a huge program to get everyone educated. And the average education went from something, high school dropouts to, I think that now the percentage of college degrees in South Korea exceeds that in the United States. And that was coupled with capital investment and technology. So those three things together, of course, are Robert Solow's total factor productivity, which is an old economic development theory. I can't say that always works. For example, nowadays, if you were to go to Lagos, Nigeria, the chances of running into a PhD are much on the street are much greater than anywhere in the United States. So there may be other issues that we need to take a hard look at to help countries develop. But I still think that education is huge. And um, it's not just because I tell my students things. In fact, I believe my role as an educator, and I've only taught graduate students, not undergraduate students, so I'm kind of uh, spoiled. So I tell my students my role is not to teach them. My role is to point them in a direction so they can learn. And a big part of that learning is not from me, it's from their student peers and creating a network of thinkers. And I think that's probably more important than anything we as teachers can tell our students. You know, learn from those around you. Think critically of their ideas. Certainly, think critically of my ideas because I'm kind of the old generation, and I won't be there to help you as you face the problems of the future. So the people that will help will be the folks that they went to school with. There are a lot of books on how to do analysis of different types. Whether it be, there's a book called The Thinker's Toolkit that talks about hypothesis testing, and it talks about uh, other tools. But the real tools are um, that thinking critically and taking in those ideas from a lot of different places.
So we are standing at a point that, and Upama can speak to that very well, because Upama and I have been educated in the same place, same education system. Is that I can say that the old model of training was, okay, you learn a bunch of things, then you come to the school and you give exam and you learn. That's it. And the neoliberal assault on education, that these are the kind of degree you do. You do BBA and you do MBA. I'm not saying that doing BBA will not help you teach, how to think critically. But are you able to hear me? Sorry, I think the line just broke a little bit.
You
Yes,
froze a little
audible.
bit.
Okay. So we say that in the 1960s in the United States or 70s, we see that increasingly what is happening, the disciplines that inspire us to think the most, let's say political science, philosophy, or anthropology, sociology, um, the funding is getting, the funding is shrinking. In the United States, one of the biggest crises is student debt. To be educated is no longer a basic human right. It's a privilege, and everybody doesn't get it. In Bangladesh, we all do not get the same quality education. People who can afford, they send their kids to international schools where they get good quality education, but not everybody gets that. My question, that in a situation like this, when, as I often quote this book name, is that the revolution will not be funded. In sources like that, in order to keep our sanity, and you also work with World Health Organization in fighting misinformation. What are some of the strategies that you have seen have been successful in combating, whether it is health misinformation, whether it is political misinformation, that you have seen worked?
Well, one of the things I think we need to understand about the environment is that misinformation is shared at a rate 20 times that of good information. And I think that Opoma's effort with her colleagues um, could make a big difference because having 500 people sharing good information um, won't necessarily counter all of the bad information, but it's a start. And all we can do is start. I echo her thoughts that the superheroes are not from the Marvel comics. They're from um, all walks of life. They're from the people that try to make a difference. Those are the superheroes today. So I would look towards them, or us, that everyone that's on here, to be thinking critically about the information that comes at them and passing on information that they feel is valid. Um, there's so much that comes at us. I typically share information from Johns Hopkins, Bloomberg School of Public Health, and not even from the medical school so much. Um, and it's really because I find that their information is sensible and understandable without being overly scientific. Because I think that the overly scientific information people just kind of turn off. So, um, I think countering the huge volume of misinformation is the biggest thing in pushing a lot of good information out. Now, here in the United States, um, we have suffered from the fact that policies relating, for example, what the Center for Disease Control is saying has changed over time. But fact of the matter is that's just the result of the scientific process, where we understand things better today than we did a year ago. But people expect that a year ago science knew everything. Well, science still doesn't know everything, and as we talked about before, the scientific method is such that we only understand better slowly.
Yeah. So, how? My last question to you is that how we from, let's say, Bangladesh can, as I mentioned, that sometimes when we reach out to professors, we do not always have good lucks. When we say that, well, you may be researching in the United States, but now we all live in one world, particularly the information world. Um, what would be your advice to Upama and me in building collaboration with professors around the world, scholars around the world, to combat misinformation, um, where we can work with researchers like you?
I think a couple of things. One, the fact that you attended that webinar with Ryerson 2 weeks ago, I think it was, and then reached out, is important. I think also we need to realize that uh, we can take advantage of what's happened to us because of COVID. Uh, the isolation um, is one aspect of COVID. At the same time, all of us became very comfortable with using tools to reach around the world. Um, Having this conversation between Bangladesh, Canada, and the United States, none of us today think is unusual, whereas 2 years ago it would have been quite unusual. So in terms of collaborating to do research, I hope that we just got started doing that. Um, you also, in Bangladesh, you have five um, infodemic managers that I know of that attended the first November 2020 infodemic manager training. If we go offline, I can pass you names and you can probably track them down better than I can. Um, and then let's see, there was another cohort of infodemic managers that happened back in June of this year, and I believe there's one going on now. So there'll be a cohort of people that you can reach out to, and I would actually encourage you to follow um, uh, WHO effort. EPI Win is what they're called, and you can just go in and follow what they're doing. They push out a lot of information on the countering misinformation effort. You'll be able to learn from their um, uh, the lessons that they've learned and the mistakes that have been made around the world in countering misinformation. I think one of the things that it has gotten very useful, at least for me, is just connecting up on LinkedIn. I mean, we have the ability now to create networks that span the world, and I would encourage anyone that's on this conversation, connect up with me on LinkedIn. Just let me know that this is how you figured out who I was. And that actually will help you do other things. For example, today or yesterday, um, I shared some information on grants that are available from a commercial firm called Logically AI, and they're specializing in using artificial intelligence to counter misinformation, and they are awarding grants um, uh, and collaboration, by the way, to work with their researchers on countering misinformation. Might be something that would be particularly valuable, especially um, if you are uh, in in Bangladesh. They would be interested in that. You'll have, I suspect, a lot of the information already is in uh, information and misinformation. Bangladesh is already in English, so that their tools would work, but they may not know that. And your perspective could inform uh, their work around the world too. So there are a lot of ways I think that we need to seek to collaborate. Um, uh, something that is coming up, and it's too late for you to put a um, proposal in, is in at the end of June next year. There is a global health security conference in Singapore, and I proposed a panel at the suggestion of one of the World Health Organization managers. I proposed a panel comprised of, besides me, of a researcher that I've been working with in Poland, and then a fellow infodemic manager out of Manila. And that kind of collaboration would not have been possible at all before COVID and before we started collaborating like we're collaborating today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Moy. We really look forward to having future collaborations, and Upama and I will reach out to you whenever we need any help. And Upama, thank you very much for taking some time and participating in this conversation. As Professor Moy said, this is just the beginning of the collaboration. As a Bangladeshi researcher in Canada, one of the things that I feel all the time is that growing up in a small village in Bangladesh and being the first among my 11 siblings to attend university, I feel like whatever I see in Canada, in terms of studying, in terms of, whether when I'm teaching a course, taking a course, researching, finding amazing tools. And I would like Professor Moy to know that my doctoral dissertation also involves building a disinformation research platform. So one of the things that we are understanding is that most of the disinformation research is done from the global north. The global south perspective is not getting adequate um, importance. So we are trying to build a global disinformation research platform where we can collaborate with. And also, when you said about English, I I would like to humbly tell you is that Upama and I are not examples. Majority of the Bangladesh will not be able to use English tools adequately, meaningfully. We don't have, Upama teaches English. I've been teaching for 25 years, using English as a medium. So obviously that's different. Um, so we're trying to create a global platform where we can collaborate with professors, scholars, writers, so that the voice from the global south gets heard and it creates a holistic perspective. We have to recognize that even I was reading a paper that in 2020, more than 93% papers were published in English. So the global publication, the examples, even in terms of data, I mean, my university has access to libraries. My university spends millions of dollars to subscribe to all the, journals. That is not the case for most universities in Bangladesh. We can't afford it. So we are trying to create collaboration where we can collectively, because as I said, that most people impacted by disinformation, misinformation, in terms of number, sheer number, it's the global south, not the global north. So we are trying to build that collaboration, and we would like your advice, your, counsel, and if there are any opportunities, like you just said, I mean, we would be really happy if you, if there is any way, whether it is sharing an email or, we'd be very happy, we look forward to have, future collaborations. And, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you, Puma. Have
Thank
a
you very
wonderful day.
much. All
And
right.
all our
Had a
audience,
great
thank you
time.
very much. Yeah. And all our audience, thank you for being with us. We look forward to a future conversation. Professor Moy, just 1 minute.